Hi, it's Benjamin Douglas Ray with another edition of Sustainable Cannabis TV. This episode is brought to you by U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development, Sustainable Cannabis Coalition, Buds Feed, and 8 Saints brand line of organic hemp CBD products. I am here with Chris Kilham. He is the medicine hunter. How are you?
I'm doing great, Benjamin. Thanks for having me on today.
You know, I was thinking of coming up with a cool title for myself, like Sustainable Hunter or something, but it didn't work. And because I just said that, my camera froze. So tell us about your background, why you here, and then tell us a little bit about the medicine hunter and your adventures around that.
Well, I come originally from the suburbs west of Boston, and as a teenager, for some reason that I don't really understand how it happened, I became interested in herbs, and that led me to reading what I could at the time, which was kind of sparse information out there, and learning from people who knew more than me, which was almost anybody I could find, and over time that led me to what I've been doing for the past 27 years or so, which is traveling around the world, investigating medicinal plants, herbs, spices, the so-called superfruits, a lot of the unusual indigenous foods out there, and helping to establish sustainable trade so that basically people in very remote circumstances can earn a living, and folks in our society and in Europe and other parts of the world can have access to unusual and highly beneficial botanical products. So that's what I've been doing, and that has led me into many countries and many friendships and ceremonies and celebrations, and has given me access to places that I otherwise never ever would have gotten to if not for the work that all focuses on medicinal plants and the people who work with them.
Did you think that you were going to do that, or did it just evolve over time
Well,
into the travel and doing what you were doing?
it's funny. I first had this idea around 1970 or 71 that I wanted I wanted companies to sponsor me to go around the world investigating natural medicines. And
Oh,
it seemed like a kind of a ludicrous idea, actually, because it just seemed very far-fetched. I didn't have any idea of what the distance was or what the steps were from that notion to it actually becoming a something. But it turned out that many years later, that's exactly how it went down. And I've had a phenomenal career working with companies of all different types and going to extraordinary places. I mean, working in Siberia, working in Vanuatu, South Pacific, working in the Middle East, being part of celebrations and things that I really would never otherwise have had entree into. But there's something very special when you work with plants. When you go to remote places, you tell people you're interested in a plant that's meaningful to them, and it just opens up a whole world. So it has been very exciting and fortunate, and I'm really hoping that once this global pandemic is over, I, along with other people, will be back out there traveling and continuing this work.
so are you saying that there are many more interesting places and more exotic places than somewhere in Boston where you are?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, the remote mountain areas of northern Thailand, right up against the Burmese border. I've done some projects there. Certainly deep in the Amazon, where I've worked about 35 times and have lived with
Wow.
native people. Yeah, the tradition and use of medicinal plants and psychoactive plants goes back thousands and thousands of years. We've
Hmm.
co-evolved with plants since the beginning of time, and we eat them, we drink their juices, we wear their fibers, we make homes out of them, we burn them as fuel, we use them
Hmm.
as medicines, and on and on and on. We have no more complex relationship in our lives than we have with plants. No more complex at all. And
Right.
so, it is especially true with a plant like cannabis, which has vast applications and a long history with human beings. But for sure, going into cultures that still maintain a strong use of medicinal plants and a good connection to nature and to wild harvesting those or to cultivating those, it's really a remarkable thing to see all of these different places around the world where there are still so many botanical treasures.
The cool thing about what you said is it's almost a universal language that's been around for thousands of years. And so you can go, I'm imagining you can go to a place where you don't know the language, yet you can relate, completely to the people over the medicine.
That's true. Although, I don't do this work by myself. I'm actually not the Lone Ranger. If I go to China, if I go to Siberia, if I go to the Middle East or Congo or whatever, I always have a group of people with me. I always have a, driver, translator, secretary, maybe an additional botanist, some other people. There's always a team. I wish I had the language skills to speak in the native tongue of all the different countries I go to. It's just not possible for me.
Mm.
I don't have that capacity. So I rely very heavily on translators and people to assist me. And I'm fortunate that people do. I've made so many good friends over the years rallying around plants and getting good trade going with communities all over the world.
Well, I'm envious. Let's talk about your book and the relationship between yoga and cannabis.
Well, my new book, The Lotus and the Bud, Cannabis, Consciousness, and Yoga Practice, it's kind of one of those long time coming projects, actually. I first got involved with cannabis in 1967, so quite a while ago. And I first started practicing yoga in 1970.
Mm.
And from that time moving forward, I've maintained a daily practice of yoga from those early years. And I also utilize cannabis often. And so I've really explored the relationship between the two, which goes
Mm.
back to antiquity, back thousands of years in India, Tibet, Nepal, and Southeast Asia in the yogic and meditative traditions. And because there is, as you know very, very well, such a vigorous interest in cannabis, and there's also a vigorous interest in yoga.
Mm.
Now we have classes out there that people are teaching that combine the two. And I wanted to do a book that was really definitive, that would give people information about the spiritual dimensions of this as I've experienced that in Himalayan temples in India and in far out places, and also an understanding of what's happening in the body and in the nervous system when we combine yoga practice with infusion with some psychoactive cannabis.
Hmm. That's a that's a it's a cool thing, but I know you're right. I mean, I onto something for sure with the combining of the two. They're just naturally, I think they naturally go together. So I'm excited for you in that. That's great. Well, you
Well,
just mentioned something that I'd like to ask you about here about spiritual. And I know you've talked about, as we talked before, about plant spirit, and I'd love for you to get into that a little bit and talk to the viewers and listeners about plant spirit.
Certainly, certainly. It's something that is harder for people to understand as we become more mechanistic in our way of life. But basically, there is a prevailing notion among indigenous people out there and among healers and people who work with plants that plants do have these cohesive spirits. That plant spirit is something that you harness when you really set about to work with plants for healing and for divinatory purposes. With the shamans that I've worked with over the years, and I've probably spent time with about 65 or more shamans in the
Wow.
Amazon and the Andes, they all make different medicinal preparations of different types, whether it's ayahuasca, for example, the potent psychedelic brew, or just medicinal plants. But at all times, they are enlisting the help of the plant spirits. And at first, it seems like an act of imagination. I think it's fair to say, this idea of plant spirit. But as you work with medicinal plants, and especially as you do so in a natural setting, so I'm not talking about receiving them in the mail in a plastic bag, you develop a rapport with the plants and you learn from them. And so the whole idea of a master plant like cannabis, for example, is that in addition to the hundreds of beneficial compounds that we know it possesses, the rich treasure trove of cannabinoids, the aromatic terpenes, the profoundly beneficial and protective antioxidant phenols of different types, that there is also this profound spirit to the plant itself. And that's something that we see echoed in antiquity. Cannabis was always considered a plant that possessed supernatural powers. It was known early on in the Vedas as Vijaya, which means victory. And, in other parts of India, it was referred to as Siddhi, and Siddhi means occult power. So from the very beginning of some of the spiritual traditions, especially yoga with the god Shiva, who's theoretically the originator of both yoga and cannabis, giving both to humanity for spiritual expansion, we see this natural twin current and the utilization not only of cannabis in a ceremonial way in yoga practice, but also as a way of enlisting the spirit of cannabis itself as a prevailing, healing, empowering, opening agent.
Do you see that adopted here in the U.S. As much as other places, or is it still lagging behind?
I think that as people live less in nature and more in urban or suburban areas, which is actually true all over the world, that we see a loss of this natural understanding and this connection. But at the very same time, I'm optimistic because many people travel. Many people are exposed to indigenous cultures where this understanding of plant spirit is sort of more intrinsic to life in the culture. And I think also many people here and in Europe are trying very hard to develop that rapport with plants, that nourish that interaction with plant spirit, because there is something intrinsic to us that we know and we recognize within ourselves because we've co-evolved with these things for millions and millions of years.
So if you live in a city and you're not in touch with, let's say, the spirit, hypothetical question, but will you enjoy the cannabis as much, or does that add on another layer of togetherness with the plant?
I think that so much of that depends on the composition of a person and the other conditions around them. I mean, somebody who's a fundamentally happy person and is with friends and maybe is sharing food, and there's this whole sense of conviviality, that's a rich, wonderful experience. You add cannabis to that, and it's just nothing but expansive. So I don't really think of it in terms of deficient per se. I just think that we are natural beings. We derive from nature. We've co-evolved with plants for millennia. And the extent to which we can maintain a richer, stronger connection with nature and with time in nature is the extent to which we can sort of maintain that essential lifeline to the source from which we ourselves derive.
I think a lot of people are missing that now. I mean, I think because of COVID, a lot of us, as we were talking earlier, are in a house or stuck, can't travel,
Sure.
and as you said, you can only take so many kind of soulful walks. So I think that once people get out and they're able to travel more and kind of get back to it, or really get out of the country, we'll start to see more of that. Because I definitely have, some pent up, travel bug within me. Parks are great, and we did a lot of it last summer. But this coming spring, I want to fly. I want to get out of here.
Sure, sure. About a year ago, I was back in Vanuatu, South Pacific, where I've investigated kava for over 25 years. And I have a deep, deep relationship with the people there.
Huh.
And I was in some very remote places that take days to get to, and very far out, and in these native huts drinking kava, late at night, very eerie and quiet and smoky and strange and low light and all of that. And the overall pervasive spirit of the kava and the antiquity of this practice, and for how long, for thousands of years, native people in the Pacific have been drinking kava at night and sitting around a fire and talking. It was really stunning to me. And I guess what I wish is that as many people as possible who are interested can have deep, meaningful plant spirit experiences to really understand more fully the depth and the breadth of what plants can bring to us and can offer, whether it's cannabis or it's coffee or it's ginkgo or it's eucalyptus or whatever the plant might be.
How would you replicate that experience with yourself, if you just had cannabis or coffee on your own?
Well, I think that a lot of it just boils down to set and setting in some ways, actually. And being in a good state of mind, in a positive and cheerful state of mind, it's the right time and all of that. If I want to kind of have a moment of demarcation, I'll sit down in front of the wood stove that we have here, that we keep going much of the winter, and just take a few moments on the carpet and relax and breathe, and then have a little bit of ganja and, look out the window at the woods, because we're facing a forest where we are, and just take a set aside time. I think a lot of it is taking time and making sure that the time that we do take isn't running between errands, that isn't, something that we're trying to sandwich in between other frantic bits of life, but just sort of open up that space a little bit. I think that naturally cannabis and many of the other psychoactive plants give us an opportunity for reverie. And if we can just take a bit of time, minutes, to enjoy that and immerse ourselves and not necessarily be looking at emails or answering whatevers, but just being there, just dwelling in the time, often that is sufficiently rich enough.
I read something one time that when you're talking with someone, when you're talking isn't as important as the space between when you're talking. And that's what that reminds me of, is to really just not hurry. I also read a stat a while ago that with this extra time that we have, instead of commuting, people did find time to read, to bake bread, to exercise. But now people are spending their commute time working. So it's very important to be mindful of that extra time, or make the time. You're never going to have the time.
Sure,
You said
sure.
sandwich it in, rushing from one thing to another, but making the time, being mindful is what it's about.
And cannabis is perfect for that. It gives us an opportunity to reflect. It activates our pleasure centers. It often, for people, induces a greater sense of calm. The expansion that we feel is really good and satisfying for the mind. I mean, so many things take place. Just enjoying the moment is kind of bathing in the goodness of that particular plant medicine.
Love that. Great. Well, I want to talk to you about sustainability in cannabis and your opinions on those. The show is Sustainability in Cannabis, and I know that you do have some opinions on that, and a viewpoint which I would love for you to get into.
I'll start out with something recently I saw an episode of something that Hamilton Morris on Vice did with the guy who owns Sensi Seeds in Amsterdam. And basically, they went to Congo, which is legendary for its ganja. And they enlisted the help of some Congolese people, and they went very, very, very far out into the countryside. And they got to some place where there was this Congolese ganja growing, and this guy Arjun from Sensi Seeds went around and, picking seeds off and going, "Wow, we're going to make billions here. This is amazing." And at one point Hamilton said, "Oh, we're going to offer anything to these people," and this guy Arjun said, "That's not how we do it."
Oh,
And I think that the real shocker is that they turned their backs on these people and walked away with their treasure
wow.
without compensation. And I am all for, believe me, I'm all for, wow, this is a great Himalayan Afghani cross, or we've got some phenomenal Laotian brown, or whatever the case may be. But I also think that we need to stop the biopiracy.
Hmm.
um in this world, you can do things that make a huge difference in the qualitative, basically in the quality of life of people all over the place. If, for example, with somebody like the Congolese, you said, okay, this village grows this ganja. If we're going to obtain seeds that are going to make us millions or tens of millions or maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars, then we need to work out some sort of fair and equitable thing so that people here also benefit. That's what being a human being is about. And so I think that in the rush for profits in the cannabis scene, um, it is entirely possible for people to miss out on the real, heart of this whole thing. I mean, when I started getting high as a teenager, it was, us getting together and sharing. It's like, oh, so and so has a joint. Okay, great, And there was this tremendous sense of sharing and excitement and mutuality and having an experience together. And as people carve out their profit niches, they very often forget other people,
Hmm.
as though there's, I hate that line. It isn't personal, it's business. Listen, business is always personal. It's
Yeah.
only personal. It's a transactional relationship between people and nothing else.
Right.
That's what it is. So for me, I think that we need a radically different way of approaching and considering seed acquisition. um, Working with these plants in ways that benefits communities of people who've established these land races over long periods of time. And I've done this with medicinal plants all over the world. You can carve out very wonderful programs of benefits and profits for people in indigenous places, where they really do get to elevate the quality of their lives. And do you know what it does to your pricing on the market end?
Hmm.
Nothing at all.
Hmm.
Nothing
Wow.
at all. You make
Wow.
a few dollars less among zillions of dollars. What the hell do you care?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yet it supports them tremendously.
what kind of human beings do we want to be? Like, if a joint is really peace, love, and rock and roll, well then, demonstrate a little peace, love, and rock and roll in your life, for God's sake.
Hmm.
Don't turn your back on. I mean, I've been to Congo. It's the most desperate, messed up, screwed up, difficult, intense, dangerous, scary, poor, opportunity free place you're going to find.
Wow.
Okay. It's really bad.
Huh.
What you could do there with people with a seed program could revolutionize a community, could get them clean water, electricity, medicine, better clothing, school supplies, maternity supplies, basics that we barely think of anymore. This
Hmm.
is not difficult. So for me, I'm thinking real sustainability from field to finish. I'm thinking cannabis that, you know, I stopped going to dispensaries as soon as I read the little warning label on the thing of ganja that said may not conform to pesticide standards. It's like, I'll never come in here again.
Mm-hmm.
I grow my own, and then
Yeah.
I give away massive amounts all year long.
Mm.
And that's what you do. You know,
Right.
you share. And
Right.
then somebody says, "Hey man, I got some really great hash. Let me give you some." Okay, fine, good,
Right.
yeah. And you go back and forth. That's what this is supposed to be about, sharing. This isn't
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be about I, me. How much can I have? And I'm not giving any to you. That's not the way it's supposed to work.
That's how it has worked here. You know, it feels like in the States for the past 10 years or more. It's what it feels like. I mean, what's going to change that?
You know, I have a certain amount of faith in the original kind of social structure that has arisen around ganja, just as I do with psychedelics. I know that, you know, there's this rapid pharmaceuticalization of psychedelics, but at the very same time, you know, throughout the course of my life, mostly when I've employed them, it's been with friends for, you know, unifying experiences that just benefit everybody. And what I think is that there is enough spirit of people, of good-minded people who are generous and thoughtful and kind and sharing and inclusive to mitigate some of the very deleterious and unfortunate effects of the great green, you know, cash grab that's going on in the cannabis scene today.
So do you think that as time goes on and this becomes more mainstream, you know, and it isn't such a scarce commodity, relatively scarce commodity, you know, federally illegal, that it will become more like that, more like alcohol, that it's more normalized, gets back to social, but on a massive scale, not just, you know, 15% or 20% of the population.
Well, for sure, more people will utilize cannabis as it's more available. There's no question about that. And it is the case that many large corporations that are vertically integrated and are set up with grow operations and licenses and dispensaries and manufacturing licenses and all of that have a huge market advantage. There's no question. But I will tell you this at the very same time, there is a vigorous underground movement, and there always has been. And that's what's different from this and say some other things is that the extra legal market has been very well established globally for a really, really long time. So to the extent that things go well and people have easy access to good quality cannabis in the kinds of forms that they want, readily available at retail and other places, yeah, I think that's going to be huge. I think it's going to be dominant. But I also think you're going to have lots and lots and lots of people like me growing on their own. I mean, it's legal for us to do it here in Massachusetts,
Yeah.
growing, you know, getting nice big yields, sharing freely with people, and carrying on the real intrinsic spirit of just human sharing that is part of the enjoyment of these plants.
Love the message, love the thought. You know, more people need to be thinking like you do about this industry for sure.
Well, thank you, Benjamin. I really appreciate the opportunity to say so. You know, I'm always impressed by how quickly ethics go out the window when money comes marching in.
Unfortunately, yeah. Well, tell us about the book, how people can learn about it, how they can get a hold of you, any websites, any shows coming up, and
Sure.
what are you excited about this coming year?
Well, the book again is The Lotus and the Bud: Cannabis, Consciousness, and Yoga Practice. And it really distills my 50 plus years of experience with this and intensive study into both cannabis around the world, you know, from Siberia to the Silk Road to throughout Asia and Jamaica and other parts of the world, and my long, long time practice of yoga, really explaining how the fusion of these two can be highly beneficial. Um, I am very much looking forward to the dwindling down of COVID-19. I think so many people are. First of all, because I want to see reduced human suffering, and secondly, because I'd like to get back out on the road vaccinated and get back out doing the projects that I love to do in far-flung places with delightful people all over the globe. And for me, I think that this year I'll probably do some return visits to the South Pacific, for which I have a great love, get back down to the Amazon, where I've been about 35 times, and just try to keep the spirit of the plant medicine work going as long as I can in as many circumstances as possible.
It's a great I'm looking forward as well to getting moving on to what's coming next, you know. So,
No
I
doubt,
appreciate your
man, no
time. Thank you
doubt.
very much. Exciting
Thank you,
conversation.
Benjamin.
Thank you. All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Bless you, man. Thank you.